We're going to start the tractate of Yevamot, which in turn is the first tractate of the order of Nashim, the order of women. I apologize for the gendered way in which this sounds. It's as if the Beit Midrash in the time of the Mishnah was populated by men, and and they discussed women. So we could have a longer discussion longer discussion about this. But suffice it to say that the Yevamot is the first tractate in the order of Nashim. And while in theory it deals with the obligation of a person to marry the wife of his deceased brother, if his deceased brother has no children, because this is an obligatory marriage, the tractate is forced to discuss the nature of marriage itself. So questions as to forbidden marriages and permitted marriages are all dealt with in the tractate of Yevamot. In other words, Yevamot deals with the concept of marriage itself, as well as the concept of yibum, of levirate marriage, to the widow of a deceased brother. And you might say that it's suitable to appear first off in the order of Nashim just for that fact, because it deals with forbidden and permitted marriages. But if we just look for a minute at the different tractates in order of Nashim, you will see that they are arranged not particularly in order of subject matter, but in order of the number of chapters. And this is the case, by the way, for the rest of the Talmud. So when we began the Mishnah of Moed, we began with the tractate of Shabbat, and it had 24 chapters. And then we went to Eruvin, which had, I think, either 11 or 13 chapters. And so it went down from Pesachim and Shekalim and so on, till Chagiga at the end only had 3 chapters. And it's exactly the same in the order of Nashim. So Yevamot has 16 chapters. And that's why it's at the head. It's not at the head because it's got foundational material, or perhaps it has foundational material because it's at the head. Maybe the causation goes the other way around. But Yevamot is at the head. It has 16 chapters. Then Ketubot, which really describes the obligation of each side in a marriage. Nazarim is about vows. Nazir is about the Nazirite. Why it appears in the tractate of Nashim at all is an interesting question, which we may be able to delve into. Sota is about the jealous husband. Gittin is about divorce. And the final tractate, Kiddushin, which is the shortest, which is only 4 chapters, is about betrothal. So that's the structure of the order of Nashim. Now, as we begin the tractate of Yevamot, there are a couple of biblical verses, or a couple of sets of biblical verses that we need. And the first one is incredibly famous. It's from Devarim, I think in the Parsha of Kitei Tzei, from memory, perhaps not. At the end of Devarim, at the end of Deuteronomy, the story of 2 brothers, Ki yeshvu achim yachdav, 2 brothers dwell together. Interesting. The Gemara will make much the fact, and the Mishnah will make much the fact they have to dwell together. They have to be living together. Achad mehem uven ein umeit achad mehem uven ein lo, and one of them dies and he has got no child. Eshet hameit hachutza leish lo tieh eshet hameit hachutza leish zar. The wife of the dead shouldn't be married outside to someone not of her kin, to one not of her kin, but her husband's brother. Yevamah yavo aleha. Her husband's brother is called a Yabam in this verse. He's not called literally her husband's brother. He's called a Yabam. Yevamah yavo aleha. He'll go into her. This is a euphemism for sex. Ulekacha lo leisha, and he'll take her to him for a wife. Ve yibma, and he will do the process of yibuming. The root yabam is used as a verb here. He will do whatever yabam is. It's often translated as do the duty of the brother. That's the rule in Devarim. And then the Pesukim go on to say that the firstborn that she bears will grow up in the name of his dead brother. So the name of the brother won't be erased from Israel. And there's a get out clause. If a man doesn't want to take his brother's wife, his yibim his brother's wife, the brother's wife go up to the gate unto the elders, and we've seen this in the book of Ruth. The story of Ruth and Boaz is a story about yibum. The brother's wife goes up to the gate and says, my husband's brother refuses to raise up to his brother a name in Israel. He won't do yibum. And they go through this humiliating and embarrassing ritual. The elders of the city call him out, and his brother's wife comes along, and she takes his shoe off and she spits in his face, and she says, so shall it be done to the man that does not build up his house. Then he crushed Mob Yisrael, Beit Chalutz Hana'al. And his name shall be called in Israel the family that had its shoe loosened. It's a humiliating and it's embarrassing ceremony, but that is the alternative to Yibum. Either the brother-in-law does Yibum, he marries his deceased brother's wife, or they together do this ceremony of chalitza. We have a choice between chalitza and yibum. And the Mishnah in Bechorot says, mitzvat yibum kodemet lemitzvat chalitza. The mitzvah of yibum takes precedence over the mitzvah chalitza. In other words, generally, we prefer people to do yibum. We prefer them to marry their sister-in-law than to do chalitza. At least that's how it was at the beginning, barishona, in the earliest times. Shehayu mitkavnin l'shem mitzvah, because people would intend to do it for the sake of the mitzvah. And then in the Mishnah and Bechorot, there's a sense of the here and now. The Mishnah goes on to say, ve'achshav, and now, and this still applies now today, by the way. So this feeling in the Mishnah and Bechorot, which is 2,000 years ago, but is using the word now, is very similar to our feeling today. Ve'achshav, she'ein miknavdim l'shem mitzvah, and now they don't intend to do it for the same as the mitzvah. Amru mitzvat chalitza kodemet lemitzvat yibum. The mitzvah of chalitza takes precedence over the mitzvah of yibum. In other words, today we prefer to do chalitza than to do yibum. That's pretty much the tradition today. One reason why the mitzvah of yibum is so interesting and so perhaps so contentious is that there is another pasuk. There's a different pasuk in Vayikra, in the parsha of Kedoshim, which seems to militate against it. So in Devarim, clear there's a mitzvah for the brother to marry his sister-in-law, his deceased brother's wife. But in Vayikra, in Kedoshim, we hear, Ervat eshit achicha lo tegaleh, do not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife. Ervat achicha hi, it's the nakedness of your brother. We're not allowed to marry our brother's wife. So how can it be that we're and this is part of the tension running through the tractate of Yevamot, and you'll see in the first Mishnah that we're playing with forbidden and permitted marriages, that we're playing on, what is allowed and what is not allowed in a marriage. This is really the structure, this is really the content of the tractate of Yevamot. So we're playing with this tension between what is mandatory and what is absolutely forbidden. And it's difficult to reconcile the two. And interestingly, the Jerusalem Talmud, the Yerushalmi in Nedarim, comes up with a line that we all know. Zachor v'shamor shnehem b'dibur echad. The word shamor and the commandment Zachor and Shamor, the two versions of the fourth commandment, to keep the Shabbat, to remember the Shabbat and to keep the Shabbat. One in Shemot and one in Devarim. They're different versions, and the Gemara says they were given in one speech, as if God said both versions simultaneously. That's a famous Gemara. And the Gemara goes on to say, which is impossible for the mouth to say and for the ear to hear. This is a metaphysical. It's a beyond physical feat for this to have happened. But hang on, but the Jerusalem Talmud goes on now to quote our Pesukim, Ervat Eishir Achicha lo tegale. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife, and Yevamot yavo aleha, and her brother-in-law shall come to her. The two Pesukim that we've just learned, they also were said together. Shnehen ne'maru b'dibur echad. They were said together, i.e. they're contradictory, like Shamor and Zachor, and somehow they were said together. We have to manage, we somehow have to keep both of them in mind together. V'chen hu omer achat diber Elohim shtaim zo shemati. God spoke once, two I heard. They're spoken with one voice, but somehow we hear it two ways. And then the discussion in the Yerushalmi finishes, Uchtiv, halo kodivrei ka, halo dvari ka eish, ne'um Adonai, uch patish yefotzetz sela. Is not my word like a fire, says God, and like a hammer which shatters a rock? In other words, somehow the divine words are beyond physical. And it is possible for two contradictory things to exist at the same time, and somehow we have to deal with it. So that is the introduction to the subject of Yevamot. But before we get into the first Mishnah, there's one other word which we need to learn, which is the word tsara. The word tsara, arrival. We're going back to Kedoshim. You can't marry a woman as well as her sister, litzror, as a rival, to uncover her nakedness in the other's life. If you marry two women who are sisters, they're rivals, they're tzrorim. And we hear this in Shmuel, the story of Hannah and Penina, the two wives of Elkanah. And we hear that Penina would make Hannah upset. Vehi asata sarata. Her rival would make her miserable. The second wife of a man is called sarata, her rival. And we're going to see now this word rival used in the Mishnah in the sense of a man's second wife. So now let's jump into the Mishnah. 15 women exempt their rival wives. That means the other wives of their husbands. And the rival wives of their rival wives. So maybe one of the rivals was then married to somebody else and had other rivals. 15 types of women exempt them from min ha-chalitza or min ha-yibum, from chalitza and from yibum. So for these 15 relationships, and these are going to be forbidden relationships in marriage, by the way. So we are going to define what a forbidden marriage is via the mitzvah of yibum, via the mitzvah of levirate marriage. We're going to define what is permitted and what is forbidden. 15 of these relationships, these forbidden relationships, they're forbidden for marriage, and they exempt wives and rival wives, both from chalitza and from yibum. So we don't have a choice of chalitza or yibum. Both are, neither one is relevant. And these are kind of classic forbidden marriage relationships. Bitor, his daughter, uvat bitor, his granddaughter, uvat bitor, uvat benor, and the daughter of his son, uvat ishtor, and the daughter of his wife, uvat bita, and her granddaughter, uvat bana, and her other granddaughter, chamota, his chamoto, his mother-in-law, ve'em chamoto, the mother of his mother-in-law, ve'em chamav, and his father-in-law's mother. That's aim chamav. Ve'achoto, his sister. This is going to be his half sister, obviously, va'achot imo, and the sister of his mother, va'achot ishto, and the sister of his wife, ve'eshet achiv me'imo, and the sister and the wife of his brother, and the wife of his brother who ve'eshet achiv me'imo is his maternal brother's wife, and the wife of his brother who died before he was born. Ve'eshet achiv shelo haya ba'olamo, the wife of his brother who died before he was born. Because remember, we said ki yeshvu, when two brothers live together, they both have to be living. Everyone has to be living at the time that this happens. V'chalato, and his daughter-in-law. So these are the 15 relationships that don't require either yibum or chalitza. Hare elu potrot sarotihem v'tzarot sarotihem mina chalitza mina yibum. So all of these exempt their rival wives. That is to say that we have our brother has deceased. Maybe he has two wives. Maybe one of them is a forbidden relationship. But the fact that this one who is in a forbidden relationship to the other brother and is therefore exempt from yibum and from chalitza, she actually exempts the whole of the harem. So however many wives our deceased brother have, they are all exempted from chalitza and yibum. And so on until the end of the world. Ad sof ha'olam. It's very interesting language from the Mishnah. They exempt their rival wives and their wives from chalitza and from yibum ad sof ha'olam, until the end of the world, i.e. ad infinitum. So, for example, if one of these wives who was exempted then marries another brother or marries somebody else and he dies, then it would have to be another brother actually, and then he dies, then they would then exempt their rivals and so on. So if people keep on marrying different men, then you have this chain of, assuming they all have more than one wife, you have this chain of additional rivals building up, and it's like a chain reaction. Each person that is exempt from chalitza and yibum exempts their rival wives, and their rival wives, their rival wives, and so on, ad sof ha'olam, until the end of the world. Now, v'chulan imetu, or me'anu, or nitgarshu, or shenimtzu elionyot sarotehen mutarot. But it doesn't always work. If any of them died, in other words, if let's say, for example, that the person with the forbidden relationship had died, or had made a declaration of refusal. Now, you can marry off your daughter. You can marry off your daughter in the time of the Mishnah when she is too young to accept marriage. In other words, below the age of 12. But if you do that, when she becomes age 12, she can say, I refuse to marry that man. So the marriage below the age of 12 is, I think it will be treated as only rabbinic, because it doesn't really take effect until she passes the age of 12 and a half, and she passes the point where she can say, I refuse to take that man. But if she made a declaration of refusal, then she's not really considered his wife. So this does not apply. Or shenit garshu, she's divorced. Or shenim tsu ilionyot. Ilonyot is someone who is congenitally unable to bear children. So maybe, for whatever congenital reason, they cannot have children. Sarotehem mutarot. And in this case, their rivals are permitted. So in this case, the other wives might be permitted to marry the brother of the deceased husband. And then the Mishnah concludes, Ein at yachol lomar b'chamoto, ve'ein b'chamoto, ve'ein b'chamav, shenimtzu elionot, or sheme'enu. You can't say of a man's mother-in-law, or the mother of his mother-in-law, or the mother of his father-in-law, that they were incapable of childbearing. Because it's kind of obvious that if it's your mother-in-law, then she must have had children. She can't be congenitally incapable of having children. Or for that matter, that they'd made a declaration of refusal, because again, they're married, right? They've clearly been married. They clearly haven't made it. They clearly haven't made a declaration of refusal. So in other words, some of these situations are logically impossible, and the Mishnah seems to recognize that.